Hey everyone, welcome back to a Liftoff PM product strategy interview. My name is Kevin Wei. I am a senior product manager at Amazon, and today we're going to be doing this mock interview with Mark. Mark, before we dive into this, do you want to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's Mark Rose. I'm a product manager for a long time. I worked at Google for a long time and did a lot of Google interviews. I do have a site, productbymark.com, where you can reach out to me directly. But let's get started. Go ahead, Kevin.
Great. And before we dive into this product strategy mock, I do also want to say that Liftoff PM is going to be your go-to source for PM interview prep. So subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and if there's anything else you want to learn about the product manager interview, how you want to up-level your interview game, just leave a comment and we'll make future videos just based on your feedback. So let's dive into this mock interview. And Mark, it's great to hear that you were a PM at Google, so hopefully this question is relevant to you. The question is, how would you 10x grow Google Cloud?
Oh, cool. Thanks, Kevin. Great question. Before I dive into an answer here, I've got a couple of clarifying questions, if you don't mind. So first question, so what do you mean specifically when you say grow? What metrics are we looking for?
Yeah, that's a great clarifying question. I would like to turn it back to you. When you, as a PM for Google Cloud, when you come across this question from leadership, how would you interpret it?
Got it. So I would interpret this question to basically grow the business. So I would look at customer growth, I would look at transaction growth, and I would look to protect margins.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's say that leadership hears this and they're aligned with this.
That's right. Next question. What type of time frame are we looking for?
Let's say that you get this question during yearly planning. So the team and leadership, they're both looking for you to provide some ideas for what we're going to be doing this year to be on track to grow 10x. Now, I know that 10x is a very audacious goal. So maybe in this 1 year, you'll be doing certain things to get to there. So maybe call out some short-term things you'll be doing, but also maybe what that long-term vision is to get to that 10x growth.
Okay, great. I think 10x for an individual year is really audacious, especially for a product that is as mature as Google Cloud. But I think you could come up with a 3 to 5 year strategy where 10x is definitely achievable. And if you looked at today, it's like, wow, that would be a massive business, 3 to 5 years from now. Last question for a clarifying question. And this is a big ask, right? So given that I want to grow this big business, which is $1 billion business, by 10x, right? I'm going to make an assumption that I can use all of the resources Google has to make this happen, right?
Correct. Yeah, no resource constraints.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So let me think about this question for a minute and let me come up with an answer.
Sounds good.
How I would like to approach this question. One is I want to look at it within the context of Google's mission and why Google Cloud is important to Google's mission. Next, I want to take a quick look at the market landscape and what is the context of Google Cloud? What do they do? And what values do they provide for their customers? What market are they in? And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a pretty detailed framework. And for today's framework, I'm going to use Porter's 5 forces. And what that is I'm going to look at competition. I'm going to look at new entrants. I'm going to look at suppliers. I'm going to look at customers. I'm going to look at these 5 forces as a way to kind of understand this question. And the last thing I'm going to do is give a recommendation for the specific things Google should do as a strategy to grow their Google Cloud business. Okay, so let's start with top of the tree. Let's talk about Google's mission. So Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And so when I think about Google Cloud, this is a product that is right at the heart of Google's mission, right? Because Google Cloud is really a suite of Google services which provide storage, compute, AI, ML, data analytics, a whole number of services to companies of all sizes so that they can grow their respective businesses. So if Google's mission is about taking the world's information and making it universally accessible, it's really about extending that mission to other companies. So Google Cloud is a direct extension of Google mission. And by growing Google Cloud, it will definitely grow Google's mission and Google in general. So that's the broader context. Now let's take a look at those 5 forces in detail. So force number 1 is competition. Now the cloud landscape is actually pretty competitive, and Google wasn't really the first player here. Really the first player here, if I remember correctly, was Amazon way back when they came out and said, Kevin, you should know this, right? So when they came out way back when, they're like, hey, we've got a gajillion servers. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those gajillion servers, which aren't active all the time, and we're going to rent them out to people so that they can use it too. So it's kind of like a way to use excess capacity that Amazon had. And it was a really cool idea. And a lot of people are like, okay, cool, I'm going to try that, especially developers. And I'll go into that later. But Amazon was very successful at that. Actually, the next player, ironically, was Google, who also thought it was a good idea, but Google thought that they would approach it in Google way, which was actually very intelligent, but not necessarily very, very developer friendly. And I remember this because I was a developer then, and I was looking at Google Cloud Solutions. I'm like, wow, that's really complicated. Yeah, I don't understand it. I'm going to go with Amazon. And I did, and I grew my first startup on AWS, but that's besides the point. But if I look at the overall competitive landscape, Amazon is a huge, huge player. Another huge, huge player is obviously Microsoft, right? And Microsoft came from the domain of mostly making products like Microsoft Office and things like that. But if you think about those products, right, they were services that were sold to companies, right? So companies would buy it so everyone could use Word and Excel and things like that, right? And so Microsoft Cloud was a logical extension of that. So they had a large customer install base from which they could sell Microsoft Cloud Azure to. And so if I look at the entire space, there's really Amazon, there's Microsoft, and actually Google Cloud. And even though Google Cloud was second in the space, they are trailing way behind. And I don't know the exact market share, but I'm going to guess it's still maybe 5, maybe 10%, because really Amazon and Microsoft are the big players, and Google's the catch-up player. Even as big as Google is, Google's the catch-up player. And there's pretty big players, right? Amazon and Microsoft are pretty big, and we'll talk about some other smaller players next. Now, the next major force we have is the potential of new entrants into the industry. And so here we have a number of different things. One, we have the startup ecosystem, right? So the startup ecosystem right now is generating a ton of cloud startups. In fact, so Microsoft and Amazon are kind of trail, and then there's like literally probably 100 of others. And especially over the last few years, and these things span across technology solutions that have new databases, AI, that is new AI services. And then there's many industry-specific solutions like in healthcare and financial markets and automotive and things like that. And there's also some country-specific solutions that I look across the landscape that are, they might be in the UK, or they might be in Australia, or they might be Africa, or they might be in Asia, but they realize people want cloud, and let's have a country-specific solution. They may not be differentiated, but they're certainly serving customers' needs. So in terms of new entrants, all of those players are potential new entrants to the space and are competitive, obviously, to Google and the rest of the ecosystem. The next major force is the power of suppliers. Now, I think this one's super interesting. And when you get the power of suppliers is what are the services, the components that you need to build a cloud? Now, in the case of Google Cloud or any cloud solution, I think there's really 2 main components. One is chips. You need lots of them, and these aren't necessarily in order. And the second thing you need are data centers, very, very large data centers, and data centers that are dispersed geographically. And so this is a really interesting space because, for example, NVIDIA right now is a leading supplier of AI chips and GPUs. And so in a way, Google and Microsoft and Amazon are all at NVIDIA's kind of beck and call to basically supply chips. So this force is really interesting that if Google wants to survive in this and want to grow this business, they've got to understand that and take advantage of that. And I think I've got an idea of how they could do that, but I'll get back to that when I talk about the solution side. And the same thing with data centers. Data centers are obviously geographically dispersed. There is one thing I will say that's unique about AI with data centers, which is that data centers historically have been very, very close to their end node. But if I look at applications like AI, it's really very compute heavy and less time sensitive. So for example, I could have a massive data center in Africa that might take another 300 milliseconds to get information from, but it could be a lot cheaper. And I'm getting that information in reasonably the same amount of time, because if something takes 3 seconds or 4 seconds and we're quibbling over 300 milliseconds, I'd rather go for the cheaper solution potentially coming from Africa. So I think that's kind of interesting. And the last force we have here is the power of customers. Now, in the cloud space, this is it's a B2B space fundamentally. And when customers start with cloud companies, they tend to end up with a provider that they started with. And I think probably the most famous example of this is probably when Airbnb, this company that no one ever heard of, started doing payments processing with a company named Stripe, another company that no one had ever heard of. And obviously, Stripe didn't grow Airbnb's business, but Airbnb became a massive company in its own right. And Stripe became a massive company because of customers like Airbnb, which grew up on their platform. Because once you choose a platform, it's kind of hard to come off of it. And so it's a really important, in this force, the power of customers is if you get a customer early and stick with them, invest with them, they'll tend to grow with you. So it tends to be a highly retentive service. So if I just take that in the background, if I look at the customers on a kind of a global level, I kind of see a number of level of customers. So one, again, I see the startup ecosystem. And right now there's a huge Cambrian explosion of AIs that are happening right now. Then I would look at, let's say, the enterprise ecosystem. And that's both for Google, you've got existing customers, but also you've got customers that are with competition, which might represent certainly a market share advantage if you can win some of those customers. And then certainly you've got global customers in regional markets, right? So you might have customers that are in Asia and customers in Australia and customers that are in Europe and so forth. And then the last force that we want to talk about is a threat of substitute products. Now, the threat of substitute products is, what other alternatives does a company have other than cloud? And what's interesting is, when cloud first came out, its substitute was like build data centers of your own, right? And everyone had their own data center. It was very expensive and costly, but eventually people won the logic of that. There is a small trend right now where some companies are beginning to insource again because the cost of cloud is becoming expensive in some cases. But actually, I don't think this is a major threat overall. I think the economies of cloud far outweigh the economies of doing it yourself. So actually, I really don't think that there's a threat of a substitute product here as much as I see the threat of just the market in general for a product. Okay, so we've talked through 5 forces here. Looking at my notes, the question is, how do we get to 10x? And so I think my strategy that I'd recommend to Google has about 4 legs. So the first leg is, of course, going to be product-led growth. Fundamentally, this is a cloud business, this is a technology business. The best product is going to win. And I think the best way for Google to win in this space are to make 2 deep investments. One is in AI, which Google is already investing in deeply, and just to continue, double down, triple down on AI investments and make AI investments that are very, very specific to customers and relevant to customers. And then the second area are vertical solutions, which is vertical solutions for healthcare, for finance, for transportation, for automotive, for all these different industries, because they're all very different. They have very different needs and they have very different discussions and lexicons and things like that. So making solutions that are specific to each of these, I think will really fuel product-led growth for Google into the future. Now that I'm actually going to couple with something else. Again, looking at our supplier ecosystem. So one is about product-led growth, which is you're going to drive features and functions and things like that, which just make an awesome experience. But then you also have to make experience that's competitive. And so in here, what I want to do is make investments in chips with suppliers, investments in data centers, so I can actually scale my business by continuing to add more function and improve the margins, which will fuel my growth. And both of those things together, features, margin improvements, will lead to good product-led growth. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is to win the love of the developer. So we talked about with customers, developers tend to go with someone they know and love. So Google didn't win the early customers at all because their customers didn't love them. They weren't that good. But they know that these customers will grow. So, and again, looking at the ecosystem here, startup ecosystem and enterprise ecosystem, I'd recommend two different tactics. So on the startup tactic, for example, I was at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference last week, and Google had a booth there, and it was super cool. I was really glad to see, Google there and the Google Cloud office specifically. But, as a developer, right, I felt like they were like relaying information versus like, I want them to roll out the red carpet. I want them to say, Mark, come into the program. We're going to get you up and running. Here's some free credits. Just like we want to get you on Google Cloud. We want to earn your business, and we want you to love us, and we want you to make it super easy. So Google needs to make an investment in this startup ecosystem. But the thing is, that's going to take a while to pay dividends, right? Invest in a bunch of startups, great, but that's going to pay dividends 5, 6, 7 years down the road as these companies grow. And we want to grow the business now, right? So that's the second tier of the strategy. The second tier of the strategy is what I call my unfair market share winning here, which is I want to go to the enterprise customers who aren't our current customers, right? And basically woo their developers. I want to wine them and dine them and do all sorts of things that basically say, we should really give this Google Cloud thing. And this isn't really an economic fight with the companies, although that's part of it. This is really, you've got to woo the developers, right? You've got to make them excited about we should really check out this Google Cloud. It's a new strategy. There's new stuff. And there's a reason for me to do it. So rolling out incentives for developers within these large companies to embrace it, to basically increase Google's market share. My third strategy for this is going to be international growth. So similar to winning the love of the developer, I think international growth can be created by creating international centers of excellence for cloud computing. If you believe the expression, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed, that's very, very true. There are many countries that, cloud is just beginning that arc. And the faster Google can get there, the faster Google can make those investments, the faster Google will see these growth mechanisms there. And then the last pillar I want to look at is growth by acquisition, right? This is a 10x growth opportunity. This is a really big deal. So I want to have a specifically funded acquisition team that's going to be looking for either specific technologies, specific industries, or specific markets that we can make meaningful growth in, and we will make those investments to help grow the business. So these 4 strategies, how does that actually result in 10x growth? So I think it results in 2 ways. So one is, the category growth of this space is probably 20%, 30% or something like that. So over like a 5-year period, right, you're looking at almost maybe a 5x growth on that. And then if you consider that maybe Google has maybe 5 or 10% market share, if you were to double its market share, which is a very reasonable assumption with product-led growth and some of these other investments. So if you've got category growth plus your market share growth at 2x, for example, you could easily get to a 10x growth in a 3 to 5 year strategy. And then the last thing I want to talk about just briefly, I always love to debug my questions a little bit, talk about what didn't I talk about? Like what would make this answer more complete? I didn't talk about regulatory environments. I didn't talk about privacy. I didn't talk about, the risk of some unicorn coming out of nowhere. I didn't talk about, I talked a little bit about go-to-market. I didn't talk about pricing. We talked about protecting margins, but we didn't talk about what a big pricing lever was. So anyways, that's how I would grow Google's cloud product by 10x. And I think that would serve Google's cloud mission. And I think that would serve Google's mission.
Awesome. Well, thanks for walking me through this. And I love how you broke it down into 4 pillars. I do have one follow-up question. So I think this is great over a multi-year period, right? Let's say you present this to leadership, you have their buy-in, you're executing this with your team. And can you just pick one of these pillars and just give me like a few sample projects that the team could be working on this year to work towards this multi-year target?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things we can do right now is really, which is Google has a product in market today, right? So something we could do literally tomorrow, right, is start the win the love of the developer series, right? And I would love to start that on a startup ecosystem and love to start up on the enterprise ecosystem. And that could work right away to start fueling growth. That's the next thing to do like immediate growth this year. The next thing I would look at are what product-led initiatives can we do in AI this year? Because again, product-led growth is always going to be the front of the spear. It does take time to build things, but it always builds confidence when you're building new products. So I think this is a really interesting case of like, what are the new features we could launch now that would have a specific splash and take the industry by, and make some noise, right? And that rolls right in line with, winning the customer. It's like, oh, we've got this cool new feature and cool new capability, and that will win the developers as well. So those are two things that I would do today to win customers now.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Mark, for this 10 out of 10 product strategy mock interview. Before we close this out, do you want to tell the audience where they can find you?
Sure, you bet. Thank you, Kevin. So again, my name is Mark Rose, and I can be found at productbymark.com. And I would love to help you out. I've coached lots and lots of product managers throughout their whole product manager journey, and I just really enjoy doing that. So please reach out. I'd love to help you.
Awesome. And for the students, viewers at home, please subscribe, like, and comment what other videos you'd like to see as we help you with your PM interview prep journey. Good luck with your upcoming interviews, and stay tuned for our next video.